All right, yeah. Well, welcome to my talk today. I have this very, yeah, clickbaity title of "I got an awesome new business idea," and originally it was like, "Now how do I get rich?" And I felt a bit bad about this title, and then I changed later on. Um, and yeah, but then in the end, I kind of felt a bit cool and a bit funny, and so I re-added it right now. So well, that's basically the point, to know early on whether or not our business idea is good, and to find out, that's the purpose of this talk. So I'd say let's dive right in, and I'd like to kick this off with an anecdote. Basically, what the team and I did, the innovation consulting team here at Tarent, was we conducted a lot of interviews over the last couple of weeks, and it was like with a very wide range of people. There were managing directors, there were innovation managers, product owners, CTOs, CEOs, whatever, like a whole bunch of people. And what we wanted to find out from them was, we wanted to let them walk through their approach on product innovation, basically lead us through all the steps involved from idea to basically launching their product to the market. And there were two emerging narratives out of these interviews. And the first one was, well, we have this idea. Management came around and they had this super nice idea, and we discussed this, we talked about it, and well, at some point we just looked each other in the eye and said, well, 9 out of 10 product ideas will fail anyways, so there's nothing we can do about this, and so let's just start hacking things together and build a product and go. And the second narrative was like, okay, well, let's buy some secondhand market data, go to, I don't know, BCG, McKinsey, or whatever, and get some market projections, revenue forecasts, growth, whatever. And then they said, well, it seems like there's a bunch of money we can get from this idea, so let's start building this. And then most of these ideas, at some point, emerged to not be a successful product. They eventually never made it to the market. Maybe new insights emerged from research, or they launched something to the market and it just didn't work out. And so there must be a better way. And this talk is about finding out what kind of ways there are to solve this problem. And so what's in this for you? I think there are two main points I want to make. The first one is that the value of your product is often the most riskiest, the riskiest assumption in your product journey. And the second one is I want to show some ways on how to sell this fast. This is not like selling in a marketing sense, but more like selling and actually getting some money as early as possible, and some extra ideas. And so this talk might be for you if you are like a tinkerer or some kind of hacker, if you have some great ideas regularly, and maybe you're helping customers out, trying to take a shortcut, for example, if you're in consulting or whatever, or maybe if you're interested in building a side hustle. So um, I hope that after this talk, you will have understood that code is usually not your main problem in product innovation. And basically, I've turned this coin. I've coined this term, "make code a first world problem." And I hope that after this talk, you will also know a few new approaches to either basically increase the chances of your next idea to be successful, or know as early as possible that the idea you had maybe just might not stick, so you can handle that and maybe pivot. And this is I've coined this term, don't scale, basically. And that leads us to the first part of this, and that's the why. And the this urge to build stuff early on in the process is pretty normal, especially if you're in tech and you think, man, I could basically just code this up in like a weekend or two or something, and this usually results in products that the market just couldn't care less about. And so the problem is that we can't know beforehand, right? We can't know beforehand whether or not a product will succeed in a marketplace if we don't start building it at some point. And usually this build process takes like super long, and there's this huge time span going down the drain, and a lot of investment, a lot of time spent, a lot of money until we get first market feedback. And even Eric Ries, the author of the Lean Startup, I mean, he's he created this build, measure, learn loop, or he made it popular. And even there, the thing, it starts with build, right? So it seems like we need to build something, right? But maybe there are other approaches to pull this off. And there are a couple of smart people who wrote a couple of smart books, like, for example, Alex Osterwalder or Rob Fitzpatrick, Ash Maria, of course, Alberto Savoya, and Marty Kagan. And basically, they all say the same thing. They say that, well, maybe you don't have to build anything right away. Maybe there's a different approach to pull this off. And so just as an example, what Ash Maria says, he proposes that if you have an idea, what you can do is fill out a canvas or put some thought into your idea. Like he proposes a lean canvas. So basically, you think of what are your first customers, what could early adopters be, what are actual problems, what are existing alternatives that people could use, and then you start identifying the riskiest part of this plan. So basically, it's a very small business plan. Then you start identifying the riskiest parts of this plan, and then you start validating those assumptions and find out whether or not those assumptions hold up. And what you do for this is you conduct interviews. In the lean world, or in Ash Maria's terms, that's a problem interview, what you would do. And then you find out, like, you get real data on your idea, you get real feedback from potential customers. And what you would do then is feed this back into your lean canvas, into your product idea, alternate about it, iterate over it, and then maybe at some point come up with a much better idea of what your solution might look like. And then you can create like click dummies or any other small artifact and go into solution interviews. And basically you ask people, or basically you try to find out whether or not this solution would actually solve their problems, and you get feedback from those people. And only then you start investing a bunch of money into building a huge microservices platform and whatever. So I think the gist of this is, or all of these approaches, and it's fascinating that basically all those authors say the same thing, that we have full control over the first artifact we create. And this does not necessarily have to be software. This could be a click dummy, this could be an interview, this could be your questionnaire for the interviews, could be basically anything, basically. So if we revisit the we cannot know beforehand slide, basically, actually, we can know beforehand, or at least we can make this build step so small that we get market feedback as early as possible. And we talked about assumptions and the riskiest assumptions in Ash Maria's sense. And the question often is, what kind of assumptions are underlying our products, our ventures, our innovations? And the theory usually talks of 4 different kinds of risks in your product. The first one is the value risk, and it consists of, does this actually provide value to anybody? And if it does, then there's a good chance that customers will actually pay for the kind of service we provide. And if there's no value, well, why would they pay? The second risk is usually usability. So can the user actually figure out on his own how to use the stuff that we're building? And the third one is feasibility, which is basically technical risk, and is about the question whether or not we can actually build this. And the last one is business viability, which is concerning, are there maybe any legal challenges? Is our sales staff trained to sell the thing that we're building? Are there any challenges regarding the fit of the product to the brand? Anything like that. So are there any impediments inside of the organization to actually pull this off? And usually the value risk is the most important to assess early on, because if it does not provide value, then it does not make any sense to pursue this even further. So before we start building anything, before we even start like doing usability tests or something, and conducting those tests with our users and asking them, well, look, here's my click dummy, and now do you understand this? Or even before we start involving stakeholders too much, that's the one thing we need to make sure. We need to make sure that the value for our customers for our product idea is there. Without value, anything else is meaningless. So the key takeaway from this section is that you should make code a first world problem. And as we've seen, there are many good alternatives to the approach of just like diving in and building anything and making a huge project out of this and spending 6 months before launching. And that takes us to the second part, the how, actually. So basically, there are two kinds of approaches to validate product ideas. There are qualitative approaches and quantitative approaches. Qualitative approaches usually consist of, for example, problem interviews. We talked about them earlier, as well as solution interviews. There's this the book from Robert Fitzpatrick, Mom Test. He basically says that if you had an idea and you would walk up to your mother, you would propose her this idea, like, Mom, I got this really awesome idea. It's this and that. Would you buy this? Then I guarantee you 100%, if your mother is not a monster, then she would say, yes, my dear, I would totally buy this. It's the best idea ever. We're going to be rich. The thing is that because she's your mother, she's probably lying to you. And if you try to instead understand the problems that your mother faces, and try to get a feeling of the situation, the triggers that leads to those problems, then it's much harder for her to lie to you about whether or not there's value in your product idea. So that's why Robert Fitzpatrick coined this term mom test. So your questionnaire, your interview has to pass the mom test in order to give you valuable results for your validation. And there are also design sprints, which are also pretty cool. They are more on the qualitative side. And the other part on the quantitative side is you can, of course, do surveys. I'm personally not too much of a fan of surveys. But you can also do like prototypes and small kinds of MVPs. Usually when we think of MVPs, minimum viable products, they tend to be used, the term tends to be used interchangeably with the proof of concept or the prototype. And usually MVPs can get quite big, so that people even spend like 2 Scrum teams on developing the MVP for like 6 months. And that's not ideal for getting feedback early. So there are like smaller versions of MVPs, which are, for example, called the Vector MVP or the Wizard of Oz MVP. And they kind of loosen up the term MVP, so it can basically be anything that you push to the market. And to show you some examples what a Vector MVP and a Wizard of Oz MVP is, I brought a few. So the first one on the left is what Buffer did quite a few ages ago. Maybe some of you know Buffer. Basically, what you can do is it's a scheduler for your social media posts. So you just choose a time when you want to post a tweet, add those tweets to your Buffer, and then it just churns them out whenever that time has come. And so what they did was they created a landing page. They put their marketing claims, this 3-step process on there, and they added a little button saying plans and pricing. It's a little small right here, but it's this green one here. And whenever someone clicked there, they said, well, it's awesome that you're interested in our services, but we're not quite ready yet. But if you're really interested, we can hook you up whenever we're ready. And so people were able to leave their emails, and they would just like get an email whenever they had their services up. And this was a way to test demand for this feature. If there were like a bunch of people signing up, that's a pretty good sign that people seem to be interested in this. And then I added also two of my own recent experiments. There was one idea I conducted with Josua, and we put this to market just to find out whether or not people would be interested in that. There's also a fake to MVP. We basically provided a 360-degree video service for events. And we had a pretty steep pricing, like 4,000 euros for like 5 cameras for the whole day. And we wanted to test whether or not people would actually be interested in buying this. So we set up a contact form and asked them for like their personal information. And when they would sign up, we would send them an individual offer. So yeah, there was another test, also a fake door MVP. And then we had a kind of mix hybrid between Wizard of Oz and fake door MVP, where we provided some travel services, like individual travel tips for your next trip. And there we also asked them for their personal information, and they would get a call, and then we would like create a travel itinerary for them. So that's like the Wizard of Oz part, where you don't really, we could automate this, and we could spend like 2 years doing some AI magic and make this work. But we didn't want to we didn't want to invest this much time and money. And we wanted to do this service manually. That's why we are like playing Wizard of Oz, and that's what the term comes from. But basically, you can do anything that helps taking a shortcut on that development time. So there are two main principles here. You want to launch as early as possible, and you want to use the least amount of code as possible. This not only translates to software, but to any kind of service. You don't want to do this upfront investment. In our tech world, that's usually the amount of code you need to write to pull this off. So your build artifact, whether it's a landing page, whether it's your questionnaire, whether it's your interview questions, whatever, should be super, super small. And then you try to launch. And there are great ways to do this. Either you could just like buy some traffic. For example, our metrics were we spent like 40 euros for a single iteration on our experiments in the past. On Facebook, Facebook turned out to be working pretty good because you can target the customers very, very precisely. So paid ads works well, but you could also go to Product Hunt, Hacker News. The thing is, you don't need much traffic, right? If you have like 100 visitors and nobody is interested in the service you provide, that may be a red flag, depending on what you want to achieve. Yeah, but basically you can get creative. So you can, for example, for our next experiment, we are trying to put objects in the real world and see whether or not people are interested in finding out what's behind them. So you don't even necessarily have to always build a landing page or build anything that's related to tech. The problematic part is how do we gauge the interest? How do we make sure that the interest that people show is actually valuable and meaningful to assess that there's value, and that we can de-risk the value risk of our product idea. And basically what you want to do is get a commitment, and there are usually 3 kinds of commitments. The first one is people leave their personal information. So whenever they give you an email, their personal email, or like their phone number, that's a pretty good sign that they might be interested, or that they might genuinely be interested. Also time spent. So for example, if you're like conducting workshops or you have a roadshow where you demonstrate your product and people show up and spend like 60 minutes to get some information on your product, that's also a pretty good indicator on that there's a commitment there to learn more, or that there's interest. And the best kind of commitment is actually cash. So maybe you can get into the luxurious situation that people give you money before you actually start building this thing. And in a B2B situation, this can be like you get a signed customer contract and you make a joint project out of this, and that could be great. Or maybe, yeah, I think that's that's the first situation that I can think of right now. So there are many terms for this. Skin in the game is the one that Alberto Savoia uses. There's also commitment, advancement, traction. Yeah, crowdfunding. Actually, that's a good one. Crowdfunding is also a good way to get cash before actually investing into code base. And what I think is really valuable when you conduct those experiments is to get a qualitative aspect. So when we first started out doing those experiments, we just measured the traffic, and this was not a good measure. We weren't able to find out like where were people put off. Like is our copywriting bad? Do they understand the service? Do they immediately bounce off our landing page? And so what we did was we tried to get qualitative elements, like you can use more sophisticated analytics, some user tracking, recordings, whatever. And I think what's a bit underestimated is to get a follow-up. So in this travel prototype that we did, we could actually, when we talk to the customers and give them our custom offer by phone, we could actually ask them, okay, well, what's your situation? When do you want to travel? And we could follow up our quantitative experiment with like more in-depth questions and get the most insight out of it. So yeah, follow-ups and record sessions. That's what was quite valuable to us in doing those experiments. And yeah, actually, I figured that I would never do anything any of those experiments without doing any kind of session recording. So to summarize, what you want to optimize for is basically for speed. We talked about this. We don't want to spend a lot of time on actually building something that nobody cares about. But you also want to keep in mind affordability and reliability of your data. And so a good metric to optimize for is hours to data. You don't want to spend 3 weeks conducting experiments to get a first idea of whether or not this would stick or not. You don't want to spend a fortune just to find out whether or not your business idea flies. So euros to data is another good metric to optimize for. So usually you want to spend maybe 50 euros max for each experiment or for each iteration, like printing some flyers, I don't know, doing some paid ads, whatever, but not like 10,000 euros or something just to get just to get early feedback. And skin in the game, we talked about is the higher your sample sizes, the better. But you need a commitment to actually make this data count. And yeah, we talked about this already. The thing is, you usually can't have all three. So you usually need to decide if you spend more on your marketing, if you spend more for ads, then of course you get more traffic. Of course, your data is more reliable, and of course, it takes a short amount of time until you get the traffic you need to validate your idea. But then again, you don't want to spend a fortune. So yeah, they're a bit at odds, those three factors. In my opinion, there are two options for building lean. The first one is just use what you know. If you're not a tech person, then just use no-code tools. Use WordPress, or maybe skip the landing page altogether. Be creative. You can just like there's this guy from Nomad List. I think he's called Peter Levels. What he did was he created an Excel sheet, a Google sheet. And he posted this on Twitter, and people started contributing, and that's when he found out, well, people seem to be interested in this. So that's a very different approach from coding up a landing page, and this can work too. But if you want to code something, or if you have to code something, then I think going prefab is a pretty fast way to pull this off. So okay, well, I forgot to replace this text here, but basically what you want to do is use pre-made components, use a styling library that's already done. Don't go custom, just use what's already there and what helps you pull this off fast. Use frameworks that help you speed up the process, that abstract away some of the complexity. So basically, you don't need custom, you just need to be fast. And what I try to achieve in those experiments is usually I try to spend a maximum of 4 hours on this, so a half day, maybe maybe 1 or 2 hours for texts and content and ad setup, and the build process is included as well. But yeah, smaller is still better. If you can pull this off in 2 hours, that's awesome. But I think 4 hours is for this classic fake door MVP landing page, let's get some traffic on their approach. That's pretty ambitious, and yeah. So the second key takeaway here is that usually, there's a saying, do things that don't scale. I want to make this a bit more concise, because at this point, you really don't want to worry about scaling at all. That's not the point. You don't want to build something that lasts like forever and can scale up to like 500,000 users. It just has to work for those 100 or 200 or 300 users you need to validate your idea, or you need to find out, to get this first sense whether this is an idea worth pursuing. So the two key takeaways are, the first one, make code a first world problem. Basically, only invest in a larger code base if it's clear that the value of your product is there. If you're unsure about value, don't overinvest in your product. And yeah, basically just focus on creating only the stuff that's necessary to validate the demand of the demand towards your product. And the second one is do things that don't scale. Basically, don't scale, don't care about scaling at all. And keep in mind that you're doing one-time experiments. 100 users, 200 users total. Chances are that you're throwing everything away, and you don't want to worry about scaling at all. So use the tools you're comfortable with. Don't overthink it. Throw away your project after. Nobody cares anyways, and don't try to automate anything. That's basically it. So it was quite short, actually, I think. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. We have a lot of time.
So yes, I have a quick question there. Sorry, my camera is in. One question regarding products that require high commitment. Thinking of your CAM for, I don't know, $4,000 or $5,000 a day, or thinking of B2B business, or yeah, something like that. If you need a high commitment, you might have to convince your customers with authority, or with high relevance, or with many touch points. And as I'm thinking of a landing page or something like that, that might not be sufficient. So any idea that has this threshold might not be validated by the things you suggested, as I got it right.
Yes, I think that's true to a point. I think there are some ideas which are more easily validated. I'm thinking of validated by using those small experiments. I'm thinking of most B2C ideas whenever you have a very specific niche that you're targeting. So for example, those travelers, right? They are a very specific niche, a very you can create ads that really point towards those kind of customers. That's very easy to validate, or that's very easy to conduct experiments. In a more complex setting, I think it boils down to trying to get a commitment as early as possible. I think that's the most important part when you have a B2B business idea that maybe needs to be done, and there's no way around this instead of coding it. There are those kinds of projects as well. And maybe it's just best to try to get the check signed before you start building this, or get a very serious commitment like a letter of intent or something might be sufficient, might not. The thing is, it's highly individual, and it really depends on your idea. There are other B2B ideas which are easier to validate. For example, since I've been working in real estate with Kartenhaus, I think I have this business idea in mind where you have those, real estate agents. They need to provide information on real estate. So basically, if you want to sell a house and they put it to the market, they have this expose kind of thing, and there's lots of data in there. So there are like texts for, on the surroundings. You need a map and anything. And what I'm thinking of is that you could provide those texts. You could automatically generate those texts, and they could just like enter the address of the property they're managing, and then they get the texts back automatically generated. And they could just copy them into their CRM and use this to market their real estate. And this screams for a Wizard of Oz MVP. Like, you just need an interface where they can enter the address. I would get an email that someone entered that address. Maybe I could add a Stripe checkout or whatever, and they pay like 99 cents for this. And I can then do this text manually instead of starting to automate this. And this is a pretty good example of a B2B idea that's also easily validated. So I think usually B2C ideas are more easily covered by these kind of experiments, but there are other kinds of experiments, other kinds of business ideas, which are also easy to test. And so it's very, very specific to or highly dependent on the idea you want to test.
Yeah, thanks. It boils down to the commitment you need from your customers, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you can think of another solution, not the solution you have in mind, but a solution which requires a little less commitment, like a first workshop, or just schedule a free appointment instead of selling your services.
Yeah, totally. The thing is, this is not like an exact science kind of thing. It's more like you're trying to replace your uncertainties and your feeling about your product idea with a less uncertain feeling, and you're like approaching certainty step by step, but it's still not exact science, even though it's a quantitative approach to product validation.
I have another question. So let's imagine we built a landing page, a fake door MVP. 100 people visit the page, no one converts. All right, no big deal. I only put 2 hours into it. So I start to try to figure out what's the problem. Maybe the website design is bad. Maybe it's the headline. Maybe the price. How do I figure out that that the idea is the problem?
Yeah, basically what you would try to is in a second iteration. So if you have 0 visitors, this may already be a pretty bad sign. So if you have like user recordings and you look into those, and everybody just spends 2 seconds on your page, sees your hero sections or your header section and immediately bounces, then that might be a pretty bad sign. But for example, if your data shows, or if your recordings show that people seem to start reading up on the sections, and then maybe they hit the pricing section and then they bounce, this might be indicative of the pricing being too high and not matching customer expectations. So what you would then try to do is in a second iteration, maybe change the pricing, make it a lower price point, and then try figuring out whether this lower price point actually leads to some more conversions. And if that still isn't the case, and maybe people, I don't know, still spend just like a few seconds on your page, then it might be worthwhile to conduct a third experiment and maybe try explaining your sections a bit better, maybe try explaining your idea a bit better. But after a few experiments, you get a pretty good feeling whether or not this could stick or not. Still, maybe you just did everything wrong and your idea is awesome and you just like are bad at communicating. I think that's still a possibility, but the more experiments you conduct, and if the result is still the same, like 0 conversions, nobody's interested, then that's a pretty sure sign that maybe this idea is not good enough. And yeah, maybe you need to iterate wildly, you know, maybe you make very vast and drastic changes, and if people still don't convert, then yeah, I think it's pretty sure that this is not the best idea. Cool. Any more questions? Right, then I'd say we can conclude this talk. Thank you everyone for attending. This was super fun, and yeah, if you have any questions, just hit me up. There's my email. Yeah, thank you.